Now, Jezza the Red is trying to sound more enthusiastic about a second referendum, and even his old hard-left soulmate, Chris Williamson, has been hung out to dry in a supposedly more determined effort to confront the party's anti-Semitism. Yes, the 8 Labour MPs who walked out of their party to create the self-styled independent group, quickly joined by 3 rebel Tory Remainers, managed to change the Corbyn Labour Party more in 2 weeks by leaving it than they managed in a month of Sundays by remaining in it. But what do they do for an encore? Will more Labour and Tory rebels flock to their banner? Are they just the Lib Dems under another name, but without the coalition baggage or Vince the Cable? Can they agree a common policy platform, or are they simply united by hatred of Brexit? Why are they a group, not a party? What's the difference? Questions, questions, questions. So many questions. So we turn to leading Tigger, Chuka Umunna, for some answers. This is his take of the week.
Last week, I left my old political party to forge a new path in the centre ground of British politics. Brexit demonstrates that at the root of our broken politics lies our broken political parties. As the clock ticks down to the Brexit cliff edge, Jeremy Corbyn continues to attach terms and conditions to his support, we think, for a people's vote, whilst Theresa May continues to be trapped by her ridiculous red lines. Our independent group of MPs is clear. Only a people's vote can clear the Brexit mess. But it's not just Brexit on which the old parties are failing us on. Our group believes that Labour is not fit to govern. The leader and his team cannot be trusted to safeguard the national and economic security. There's an intolerance of dissent and debate, and the party too often pits one part of society against another. And then, of course, there is the disgraceful ongoing scandal of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, as illustrated by the recent suspension of Chris Williamson this week. The Conservatives have proved to be a lamentable failure in office. They've abandoned the principles that Theresa May talked about on the steps of Downing Street in 2016. They're in hock to the right-wing ERG. They are failing to address the challenges facing our country. Britain deserves so much better than this. That's why we've left behind the failed old tribal politics to build something more appropriate for the future in Britain. Our new independent group has been formed around shared progressive values to build a consensus that can take our country forward. We include a former GP, social worker, lecturer, solicitor, teacher, entrepreneur. We look like modern Britain. We say to politicians of all parties who share our progressive values, come and join us. We need to dump the old tribal politics of the 20th century and build an alternative fit for the 21st.
And our thanks to the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London. Chuka joins us now. Welcome back to the programme in a different guise from last time.
on a different sofa.
Liz, are you tempted to join the Tiggers?
Well, much of what Chuka has said about his values and the challenges facing both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, I agree with. I think it was a very, very difficult and sad week last week for me. Many of the people who left are my political allies and friends, but I've taken the decision to not quit the Labour Party because I think, despite everything that Chuka has said, the last 3 or 4 years for me doesn't wipe out the last 120 years of the Labour Party's history.
You've not been in the Labour Party for 120 years.
Sometimes it feels like it. Only 27. Only 27. And
so you're not going to join the Tiggers for the foreseeable future?
No, because
caveat?
No, I'm not. I've got no intention of quitting the Labour Party, but I understand why Chuka did, and I don't doubt his principles or values.
Well, I completely respect those who, like Liz, and Liz is a good mate, have chosen to stay in the party. We share the same social democratic centre-left and values. It's a very personal thing. I mean, it was a huge thing to do what we did last week. It was really, really difficult. But I think ultimately there are a few common strands for those of us who reached the destination. And the first is honestly, this is not the Labour Party that I joined 22 years ago. It's a very different animal. I mean, more than 80% of the membership were not members before May 2015. And a lot of those, they've been very open. In my old local party, they joined because of Jeremy.
It's the Labour Party polling better than until you left, polling better than any other Labour Party in Western Europe.
But in all consciousness, I just honestly didn't feel like I could go around the constituency I represent and say, vote Labour and let's have a Labour government for a number of reasons. Not least, I just don't believe that Jeremy Corbyn is fit to safeguard the national security of our country. And I couldn't. You always. Everyone dreads coming on some of the programmes that you have fronted, Andrew.
Oh, thank you.
No. In a good way, but because
now you know what's happening to us.
But because they're going to be asked the question. Do you want to make Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister and the team around him put them in charge?
And you can answer that honestly.
And I just felt I can't say that's what I want. And fundamentally, in fairness to the Labour Party, I think the whole system is broken. This kind of two-party system is not appropriate for this century. It just isn't.
Are they going to change the political weather?
Well, they have. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn's fear that more might leave and his wish to deflect attention away from the PLP meeting where anti-Semitism was being discussed led to this extraordinary announcement that the Labour Party would officially be backing a second referendum. I don't think in the end that's going to change anything, including Brexit, but it was remarkable, and I think the message should be to those who are still inside the Labour Party and contemplating leaving it, that more change could be afoot, that the leverage is there, either by threatening to leave or indeed by leaving. So I think, Chuka has already earned a footnote in history, but at the moment, I would fear that's probably it.
Let me ask you a couple of questions about. So far, you're a group of Labour moderates and One Nation Tories.
Yes.
So that makes you pretty centrist. You say centre-left, others may say...
I describe it as progressive.
Right, OK, that's fine.
Politics there.
Where in the world are centrists doing well at the moment?
Well, if you look at Justin Trudeau in Canada, he obviously beat the odds in 2015.
So you've got Canada, where else?
You've got Canada, obviously France.
You've seen the Gilets jaunes.
I have, but I've also seen the fact that President Macron's approval ratings have gone back up to beyond 40%.
No, they haven't actually. I looked at the latest polls tonight. They're still around 30 and have started to fall again.
Well, that's not what I saw. But
is it true you've got a picture of President Macron on your wall?
I think it's on my Instagram. I met him when he was the Minister for the Economy in France and I was the Shadow Business Secretary. And also, actually...
And you text him?
Well, I'm not going to go into the content that I may, all the different contact I may have had with the President of France. But
I'll take that as a yes. How would you take that? I think a yes.
Well, look. But in Spain, in Sweden, there are lots of places where actually progressive politics is successful.
Social Democrats in Sweden just had their worst result ever. In the election.
They are in government.
A minority government.
They are in government. But, look,
but the worst was in Spain, the socialist government, which wasn't elected, has now had to call an election.
Sure, but this is...
I don't know where this centrist revolution is coming from.
Well, hang on. We're not necessarily arguing that there's been a revolution, but what we're saying is there is a politics here. There's a progressive politics. There are people who... the centre-left tradition, the Liberal tradition and the One Nation Tory tradition, all of these have a lot of values in common. Now, this isn't about saying, oh, well, what's happening in other countries, can they win, can they not? It's actually what we believe. And the reason that I left the Labour Party was because fundamentally I didn't believe it was matching my values. And that's, if you look at the former Conservative members of our group, they didn't believe what their party was doing was matching their values. So your values and your principles come first. We didn't do this necessarily because we thought we were going to trigger a massive revolution, as you described, but we did it because it's the right thing for our country.
You've called yourself at the moment the Independent Group.
Yes.
TIG, hence you've been called Tiggers. Take me to your leader.
Well, we're an independent group, so we're not a party and don't have a leader. However,
haven't you? I think is it past midnight because you did embargo this. Yes.
Yes.
You've just been announced as the spokesperson for the group.
But we're really clear that we correct, but we all
have...
So
you are the leader de facto?
No, because we're not a political party and we believe that everybody's got a responsibility to lead. However, Andrew,
The spokesperson becomes leader.
We're clear that we want to present an alternative for people at the ballot box, and that will require us to be a form of party that people can vote for. And in that situation, you would have a leader. But right now, we don't. And what's been nice, actually, in a way, is that we were able to decide amongst ourselves what different people would like to do, what portfolios they would like to cover in a consensual way. So we are trying culturally to be... Well, there's only 11 of us, so of course it's a bit easier.
Are you warming to this idea, Liz?
No, I'm not going to repeat what I said before, but I think there really is a challenge for the Labour Party here
to ensure
that people with social democratic, progressive values aren't just tolerated but have a strong voice. And I think one of the things that really struck me about what was said, and I have found true, is that some of the bullying and intimidation within the Labour Party means people like myself, who have had a long and proud tradition in the party and what it's achieved, are too often frightened to speak out. And I think that has to change, because both parties are incredibly stretched. And the party that doesn't just talk the talk of a broad church but makes it a reality is the party that will win the next election.
Chuka thinks that Mr Corbyn as Prime Minister would damage the economy and national security. Do you?
Well, as you know, when I stood to be leader of the party, not very successfully, I expressed a whole range of different views from Jeremy about...
So what's the answer to the question?
Well, I think he has to do more to convince people that...
Oh, no, this is not about convincing people. This is whether... What does he say? Chuka takes the view that what he stands for is a threat to the economy and our national security.
Well, I believe that he has more to do to convince the public, not just me, but the general public, that he can be trusted on national security, and say that we remain firmly committed to NATO and our, nuclear deterrent. That is what I stand for.
No, I know
and
what you stand
I hope and believe that the Labour Party will do.
The problem here is that, if you look at formally the policy of the Labour Party is committed to the nuclear deterrent, but it has a leader that has said they would never, ever use it.
He's not very keen on NATO either.
No, he's not keen on NATO. I just think, for me, and no disrespect to people, as I said, like Liz, who have reached a different place, I just can't. I don't see how you can argue for that.
All right, but will this be attractive to more Tories? 3 have gone so far. Others could be.
I think that depends a great deal on what happens next. I mean, Anna Soubry has this illusion that the Conservative Party is being driven by the Brexiteers, whereas all the evidence is rather the contrary, that it's being driven by the Remainers. And I think the drive by the Remainers is likely to continue. I think Brexit is now a receding possibility.
We'll come on to that.
And with that in mind, I think it's quite unlikely that more Tories will leave.
I mean, you want a second referendum. Indeed, I think all of you do in the group. Because you say the facts have changed. We know a lot more in 2019 than we did in 2016. But the facts have changed in Streatham too, haven't they? They elected a Labour MP. They don't have one now. Don't they deserve a second vote?
Well, I was very clear. I mean, the biggest issue at the last general election in my area was Brexit, and I actually stood on a different Brexit manifesto, as it were, and as a result I got a much bigger increase in the share of the vote compared to, say, Kate Hoey.
You got elected under the Labour ticket. And people voted for you.
I hear you, Andrew, but at the end of the day, under our constitution, and Jeremy Corbyn has said this himself, you elect the individual first and foremost, and the problem with the Labour Party in my area is essentially the National Labour Party broke its contract with my constituents. I didn't. I was very clear that I was always going to fight against a Tory hard Brexit, and there would never be any suggestion that I would facilitate Brexit in any form. That is not what the Labour Party's position has been.
So you just associated yourself from what the Labour manifesto had to say?
I did.
And you think that gets you out of having a second by-election, or a by-election for you to be elected in your new political status?
Well, I'm clear the basis of our constitution, clear on the basis on which I stood. And by the way, I mean, Brexit is the biggest issue facing our country right now, and parliamentary elections are not going to solve that.
But you know, no matter how big a personality or how well known, party labels matter more. More people, the Labour brand is bigger than any one individual. You ran on the Labour brand. You want a second election on the referendum, but you're not prepared to give the people of Streatham a second election.
But the elections, any parliamentary elections won't resolve Brexit. And as I said, the biggest issue in my area at the general election was Brexit, and I stood on a distinct and different manifesto.
What do the 11 of you have to say to the 52% of people who voted to leave?
Well, I actually think that if you voted to leave, you are equally dissatisfied with what the Prime Minister is proposing as many people who voted to remain. And that's, that is clear from a lot of polling research.
You're all Remainers. What have you? I mean, you're not even putting a candidate up in the Newport by-election.
Well, as I said, we're not a party,
It's a Leave constituency. I can understand what you've got to say to Remainers. I can understand the appeal you will have to Lib Dems too. They may see a more effective way to Labour Remainers, Tory Remainers. But 52% of this country voted to leave. I don't see you've got anything to say to them.
Well, if you wanted a kind of hard Brexit, as it were, the purist kind of Brexit that George Eustace wanted, at the moment you would be denied that. At least if there was a people's vote, you would actually have a chance to vote for that option on the ballot paper. And by the way, whilst we knew what the will of the people was, as it were, in 2016, or in terms of the numbers who participated in that referendum, part of our challenge right now for Parliament is we don't know what the will of the people is at the moment. And we also know that since 2016, more than 2 million young people have come on to the register who this is going to affect more than any other group, and they haven't had a say yet.
We have a better idea of the will of the people. There of all 11 you went back to your constituencies and created by-elections.
Well, it's 11 out of 650 constituencies, so it wouldn't
Still
necessarily it wouldn't be a national parliament. I'm not sure it would.
I mean, the challenge for the independent group, and I would argue much more strongly for the Labour Party, is that we have spent barely any time on the root causes of why people voted leave, their anger and disaffection with the way the economy in the country is working. And the job of progressives is to provide real solutions to the problems people face, not a false prospectus of Brexit, which isn't going to address the concerns that people have. That is the challenge for progressives. I'm sure.
So why aren't you joining him then?
Because
that's
I believe that is
that's the challenge he's taking up.
Because I believe that the Labour Party, over its 120-year history, has been the party that has delivered that progressive change, and I'm not going to give up on that.
Despite the anti-Semitism, despite the lack of support for NATO, despite the behaviour over Skripal, wanting the Russians
I believe
to
all
see
of that must change. I believe all of that must change.
But it's
on
not
anti-Semitism, but those of us who want to speak up about it want to see that change happen, and it has to happen, because if it doesn't, we are not going to be successful at the ballot box, because if we don't eradicate anti-Semitism, bullying and intimidation, and convince the country that we are trusted not just on the economy but with our national security, we won't get into government to put our values into practice. And
I think
that's
the
what I'm
problem
going
is
to fight
you've
for.
got two old parties that were born of a different Britain, born of a different century, and they are not broad churches anymore. I do not believe they're going to go back to being so. The Labour Party certainly isn't. It's finished as it was. It is a new entity for me now, and we've got to fix it because the politics is broken.
We're coming to the end. Just very quickly to ask you, if the Labour Party you believe is broken, you think the Tories might be too, but are you expecting more Labour MPs to join you?
I think there are a lot of people on a journey, but to be honest, in your heart, only you know when you're going to reach the destination. And there were a group of us who initially made the jump and we knew it. But for example, Joan Ryan, I knew Joan was on a journey, but I didn't know when she was going to get to the destination.
But are you expecting more?
We are hoping that there will be more joiners, but we don't know. Look, nobody has told me I'm going on this day, but a lot of people have told us, not just in the Labour Party, but in the Conservative Party, we are deeply unhappy. We share your values. We've listened to what you've said. There's nothing we could disagree with, but it's when they reach the destination. I don't know.
OK, we shall see. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us on.